The Lothians had arrived without ceremony, their sleek ships slicing through the sky in silence as they approached the small town on the edge of the Meadow Earth. Had been a curiosity to them, a primitive planet teeming with weak creatures and vast untapped resources. The Lothians had conquered countless worlds before, but Earth was different. This place held something they could not understand, something they couldn't predict. Commander Zarnok stood at the helm of his ship, staring down at the blue and green orb below, his calculating eyes scanning the terrain as if mapping out their conquest. His species never left anything to chance. They had always been efficient in their work, swift in their decisions. But there was something about Earth that made him hesitate for a moment, something that gnawed at the back of his mind. But he quickly pushed it aside. The mission was simple: eliminate anything that posed a threat and claim the resources Earth had to offer. They had studied human society for weeks, observed its patterns, its weaknesses, and had concluded that the planet was ripe for invasion. Their task was to soften it up with a quick demonstration of their superiority, and then begin harvesting its wealth. The soldiers beneath him were eager. They saw only an easy victory, a chance to prove their strength, to test their weapons against a species that had never encountered the kind of technology the Lothians wielded. But as the ship descended toward the meadow, they saw a figure standing alone in the distance, a human girl, the rest of her town oblivious to the alien presence. Just over the horizon, Commander Zarnok looked out over the battlefield. The plan was simple: strike first, eliminate the human opposition. But there was no resistance to be seen, no weapons, no soldiers, only this girl playing in the field, her small silhouette framed by the vibrant colors of the setting sun. She was completely unaware of the danger looming over her. The soldiers stood at attention, awaiting his orders. The commander pondered for a moment how easy it would be to deal with her, how simple it would be to test the new weapon they had developed. This weapon would obliterate her with little effort, a message to the planet's inhabitants to show them that resistance was futile. After a moment of silence, he gave the order without hesitation: fire the weapon. The blast hit her before she even had a chance to react. A bright flash of energy erupted in the meadow. The air trembled as if the very world was shuddering at the impact. Lily's body crumpled to the ground, lifeless, her dog barking in confusion and fear. The Lothians watched in silence, waiting for the expected result. But instead of the satisfaction they anticipated, something strange began to happen. The ground beneath them seemed to hum with a low vibration. The air thickened and the sky darkened, as if reacting to the loss. The energy that surged outward was unlike anything they had ever experienced. It wasn't just the death of a human girl. It was as though the entire planet had responded to it, as if it had felt the pain. The shockwave of that loss rippled through the atmosphere, sending a warning to the invaders that they had done something irreversible, something they couldn't yet comprehend. As the Lothian ship hovered above the meadow, the unexpected wave of energy grew stronger. The air around them felt alive, as if the very atmosphere was pressing in on them. The hum that filled their ears was not mechanical. It wasn't a sound they could analyze. It felt like the pulse of the planet itself reaching out and touching them. There was a weight to it, something ancient and deep. And the longer they stayed, the more uncomfortable it became. Commander Zarnok narrowed his eyes, still trying to understand what had just happened. The weapon had been effective in its design. It should have neutralized the girl's life sign instantly. And yet, instead of victory, something far more disturbing occurred. He turned to his soldiers, all of them now on edge, their weapons humming nervously. They had been prepared for the usual response: resistance scattered, or the quick surrender of primitive species. But not this. This wasn't like anything they had experienced before. And then the ground beneath them cracked. The earth trembled as if it had been wounded. The shockwave spread outward, reverberating across the planet's surface. The trees around them swayed violently, as though the very roots of the planet were stretching and shifting in response to the disturbance above. The Lothians looked at each other, confused, but also afraid. The commander's mind raced to piece it all together. There was something far deeper at play here than just the girl's death. As the tremors subsided, the world fell eerily quiet for a moment, but only for a moment. The sky shifted suddenly, turning from the calm blue of the afternoon to a deep crimson hue. The air thickened and grew colder, as though a storm was gathering far off in the distance. The Lothians could sense the change, but could not explain it. It was as though the planet itself had taken notice of the intruders and did not approve. They had expected nothing but a simple mission, no complications, no resistance. Instead, they had unwittingly triggered something, and they were starting to realize that this was no ordinary world beneath them. It wasn't just Earth that had reacted. It was as if everything in the environment had come alive. Plants that had been still moments before began to pulse with an unusual energy. The wind picked up, swirling violently, as though the planet was preparing to defend itself. Commander Zarnak's mind raced again, but with this thought came another realization, a terrifying one. The girl had been just one person, but her death had triggered something. What if this world wasn't as weak as it appeared? What if this planet was somehow bound to its inhabitants in a way they couldn't understand? What if the very forces that sustained Earth were alive in some sense, and more connected to the humans than anyone could have predicted? Lily's death might have been the spark that lit a fire, something that awakened the dormant energy of this planet, and now the Wylothians were caught in its wake. It wasn't just that they had killed a human girl, it was that they had inadvertently triggered something far greater, something that now seemed to be watching them. It was as if the planet was holding its breath, waiting for their next move. As the Wylothian soldiers tried to regain their composure, the sensation of being watched grew stronger. It was no longer just the hum of the planet. It was the feeling of something vast, ancient, and powerful stirring in the depths of Earth. Commander Zarnak clenched his fists, his instincts telling him that they had underestimated the true nature of this world. He ordered his crew to prepare for immediate departure, eager to retreat and assess the situation from the safety of their ship. But as the Wylothian ship ascended, the impossible happened. The ship trembled, its engines sputtering as if caught in some invisible force. The sky above them, once a simple expanse of blue, now seemed to ripple with energy. The ship's sensors were going haywire. Disorienting flashes of light filled the cockpit, and a low rumble echoed from below, growing louder with every passing second. The ship's trajectory was changing. It wasn't just gravity, it was something else, something deliberate. The Wylothians were no longer in control. "Commander," one of the officers called out, his voice filled with panic, "we're being pulled back. The ship is turning. Against our will." Zarnak's eyes widened in disbelief as the ship, once soaring freely into the sky, was now being dragged downward. It wasn't just the power of the planet's gravity. It was as though the very air around them was alive, conspiring against their retreat. He frantically issued orders to disengage the thrusters, but it was no use. The Wylothian ship was caught in something far more significant than their advanced technology could contend with. The energy fields surrounding them seemed to intensify, distorting their ship's systems, and the once clear sky was now swirling with vibrant, unnatural colors. This was no ordinary natural phenomenon. It was deliberate. It was as if Earth itself had become aware of their presence. Back on the ground, the strange unity that had begun to spread among humanity was now taking shape in ways no one could have predicted. People from across the globe, each one unknowingly connected to the same mysterious force, began experiencing shared visions and heightened senses. The shockwaves of energy from Lily's death had unlocked something in the human race, a dormant potential that flowed through their collective consciousness. General Mitchell, far removed from the chaos of the alien encounter, was one of the first to feel it. As he sat in his office, a deep, unexplainable sense of connection washed over him. For the first time in his life, he could hear the thoughts of others, strangers, citizens across the globe. He could feel their emotions, their worries, their strength. And most startlingly, he felt something vast and powerful rising within him, something that came not from technology or weapons, but from the Earth itself. In cities across the world, humans were waking up to a new reality. Children sensed it first, an electric pulse that ran through the air, making their skin tingle. The elderly, who had lived through centuries of human history, suddenly felt an ancient energy stirring in their bones. The Wylothians, still battling to free themselves from Earth's pull, were unaware that this wave of human consciousness had begun. The tide was turning, but they could not see it yet. They believed they were only facing resistance in the form of earthly forces, wind, gravity, a planet they thought was primitive. They did not yet realize they were confronting the very will of Earth, harnessed through the shared strength of humanity. As the ship was dragged closer to Earth, Commander Zarnak finally gave the order to land, though it was more of a forced crash than a controlled descent. He had no choice. There was no escaping this. The reality of the situation was dawning on him, and it was worse than he could have imagined. "Prepare for impact," Zarnak shouted, gripping the controls as the ship hurtled toward the surface. His mind raced, but there was only one conclusion he could draw from the strange force at work. They had awoken something far beyond their understanding, and it was already too late to turn back. The ship's descent was chaotic, a cacophony of alarms blaring as the vessel crashed through layers of atmosphere. For a moment, Zarnak felt as if the ship was being pulled apart by unseen hands, every part of the craft straining under the immense force. The ground was rushing up toward them at a terrifying speed, and the commander's mind raced, scrambling for a plan that might save them. But deep down, he knew that there was no way out. Not now, not with the planet itself seemingly against them. With a final, jarring thud, the ship slammed into the Earth's surface, sending a shockwave through the surrounding forest. The impact threw the crew members to the floor, disorienting them further as smoke filled the cockpit. Zarnak pushed himself up, coughing as the ship groaned under the force of the crash. The ship was damaged, but it wasn't destroyed. Yet, the commander's thoughts were still clouded, the ringing in his ears deafening. He staggered toward the damaged control panel, his hands shaking as he tried to restore power. The ship's communication systems were inoperable, and their external sensors had been disabled by the strange forces that had pulled them in. Outside the ship, the landscape was eerily still, but Zarnak could feel it. There was something watching them, something waiting. The air was thick with anticipation. As he stepped outside the wreckage, he felt the weight of the planet pressing down on him, as if the very ground beneath his feet was aware of his presence. The trees around them stood unnaturally still, their branches rigid, as if frozen in time. The atmosphere itself seemed to hum with energy, a low vibration that resonated deep in his chest. It wasn't a natural occurrence, this much was clear. It was as if Earth itself had awoken from a long slumber and was now observing the invaders who had dared to trespass. Zarnak signaled for the rest of his team to join him, and they slowly gathered outside the wrecked ship, their weapons at the ready. But they were no longer certain of what they were facing. They had expected a quick victory, a simple mission to subdue and conquer. Now, they were on a strange, hostile world where their advanced technology seemed to falter at every turn, where every step they took felt like a challenge to the very planet beneath them. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the ripple effects of Lily's death continued to spread. General Mitchell, still connected to the strange collective consciousness that had awakened in humanity, felt a surge of power rising within him. It wasn't just a feeling. It was as though the entire planet was now aligned with him, a force that could not be ignored. He could sense the presence of the Vilothian invaders, their energy like a dark spot on the otherwise peaceful planet. But now, humanity had its own power, a force that would not be so easily crushed. Across the world, people began to unite, not through speech or technology, but through something far deeper. A shared understanding, a collective will. They could feel each other's emotions, their thoughts, their fears. And most importantly, they felt their strength that had been hidden for eons, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Zarnak's soldiers, still recovering from the crash, were on edge. They couldn't explain the strange occurrences around them, the way the ground trembled beneath their feet, the unnatural stillness in the air. It was as though Earth had become sentient, and it was watching their every move, waiting for them to make the wrong choice. The commander turned back to his crew, his voice tight with frustration. "We've underestimated this planet," he said, his tone grave. "It's not just the humans we have to worry about anymore. We've awakened something far greater than us." And as he spoke, The ground beneath them rumbled once again, as if to prove his words true. Earth had noticed them, and it was not pleased. The rumbling continued, louder now, almost like a warning. Zarnak's heart raced as he scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of movement, anything that might explain the feeling of growing unease. But there was nothing. The forest remained still, the sky darkening, and the air thick with a presence that felt more like a living being than a planet. He could almost feel the earth breathing beneath him, as though it was alive, its pulse resonating in the very soil. "Commander, we need to get out of here," one of his soldiers urged, his voice trembling with uncertainty. The ground was trembling beneath their feet now, the trees shaking as if responding to something beneath the surface. The Lilothians had encountered hostile worlds before, but this was different. Zarnak gritted his teeth and looked toward the wreckage of their ship. They were trapped. The ship's systems were down, and the communication arrays had been disabled in the crash. They had no way of contacting their fleet. It was as though they were isolated, cut off from the rest of their empire. And it wasn't just the ship that was malfunctioning. His own senses felt off, like the planet was distorting his perception, throwing him off balance. He turned to face his team, his voice firm but with a hint of hesitation. "We can't leave yet. This world is dangerous. But we need answers. We need to figure out what happened here." The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, but followed orders. There was no choice. They had come to conquer, to harvest, but now they were simply trying to survive. As they moved cautiously forward, each step seemed to be met with resistance, the air thick with the strange energy that surrounded them. Zarnak could feel it, too, the sense that something was watching them, tracking their every move. The thought of retreating crossed his mind, but the thought of what was happening to their planet, to their mission, kept him moving forward. As they ventured deeper into the forest, they came upon a clearing where the landscape seemed strangely undisturbed. No signs of the earlier tremors, no indication that anything was amiss. But the silence was oppressive. No birds, no insects, just the eerie stillness of a world that seemed to be holding its breath. Zarnak knelt down and placed his hand on the ground, trying to understand what he was feeling. The vibrations were faint, but there, just below the surface, as if Earth itself was alive, pulsing with some hidden force. He could almost hear a whisper, like the planet was speaking to him in a language beyond words. It was a sensation he couldn't shake, a deep primal connection that unsettled him. This world wasn't just a planet. It was something more, something ancient. Suddenly, a sharp crack pierced the silence, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Zarnak's soldiers tensed, their weapons drawn. A low growl echoed from the shadows at the edge of the clearing. "Stay alert," Zarnak ordered, his voice tight with anxiety. From the darkness emerged something unexpected. Humans, but not just any humans. These individuals moved with a strange, synchronized grace, their eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity. They were not afraid of the Lilothians. In fact, they seemed to welcome them with a knowing calm, as though they had been waiting for this moment. Their eyes locked onto Zarnak and his soldiers, and for a moment, the commander felt a wave of intense emotion. Grief, yes, but also something else. Something powerful. "Who are you?" Zarnak demanded, his voice cold, though the unsettling connection he felt with these people was beginning to unnerve him. One of the humans stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "We are the Awakened," she said, her words carrying a weight that Zarnak could not ignore. "We are the voice of this planet, and you have made a grave mistake." The air around them seemed to thicken, and the Lilothian soldiers felt it, too. The overwhelming sense that they had not just invaded a world, but had trespassed on something sacred. The humans were not afraid, not intimidated by their weapons or their technology. They stood tall, united, as though they were part of something greater than themselves. Zarnak's stomach churned. He had thought he understood the rules of conquest. But this This was something far beyond his comprehension. He had thought they were the invaders. But here, on this strange, powerful world, it was the Welothians who were the intruders, and they were about to learn just how high the cost of their arrogance would be. The human who had spoken to Zarnok took another step forward, her posture resolute, and the others behind her mirrored her unyielding stance. The air between the two groups felt heavy, almost charged, as if the very ground beneath their feet was aware of the tension. Zarnok's soldiers tightened their grips on their weapons, but the humans didn't flinch. They stood like statues, calm but not afraid. "You're not from this world," the woman said, her eyes narrowing slightly as she surveyed the Welothian invaders. "You've come to take, to destroy. But you don't understand what you're dealing with. This is no ordinary world. This is Earth." Zarnok's confusion deepened. The woman's words hung in the air, but they made little sense. Earth was a primitive planet, far below the technological standards of the Welothians. They had come to take what they wanted, to extract the resources that would power their empire. This was just another world to conquer. But the intensity in the woman's eyes, and the strange connection he now felt to the planet, suggested that something was terribly wrong with their plan. "Tell me what you know about Earth," Zarnok demanded, his voice sharp, trying to regain control of the situation. The woman did not flinch. "You don't know anything about Earth, do you?" she replied, her tone a mix of pity and warning. "You've seen it as a resource, a conquest. But Earth is alive. And humanity. Humanity has always been connected to it in ways you couldn't possibly understand. When you killed that girl, you triggered something ancient. You've awoken Earth's consciousness. And now you've angered it." The words hung in the air, a revelation Zarnok wasn't prepared for. He had felt the planet's pulse, but he hadn't believed it. The idea that a planet could have its own consciousness, a will, was far beyond anything the Welothians had ever encountered. His kind had traveled to countless worlds, taken what they needed, and left. There had never been anything like this. The woman's eyes seemed to glow faintly as she continued. "We are the awakened, as we said. We are humans who've tapped into the connection Earth has with us. It's not just the land, the air, or the oceans. It's the very fabric of reality here. And it listens. It feels." Zarnok's mind raced. The Welothians had assumed the planet was just a resource to be consumed, but now they were beginning to realize how wrong they had been. This was not just about fighting a species, it was about challenging an ancient power that was far older than they could comprehend. "I don't care about your stories," Zarnok growled. "You're just humans, weak and easily controlled. We've taken worlds far more dangerous than yours. And we'll take this one too. You think you can stop us?" The woman's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no humor in it. "You're right about one thing. We are just humans, but humanity is more than what you think. We've always been connected to Earth's heartbeat, and now you've given us something we didn't even know we had. We're no longer alone in this. Earth is with us." Zarnok's soldiers looked to their commander, unease creeping in. This wasn't the victory they had anticipated. There was a power here that was beyond their control, something in the very atmosphere, in the ground, in the humans themselves, and they hadn't even begun to understand it. As the woman's words resonated in the air, a sudden gust of wind picked up, swirling around the group. Zarnok's soldiers instinctively raised their weapons, but the wind wasn't just wind. It was something else. A force, something that responded to the collective will of the humans around them. The trees bent as though in acknowledgement, their leaves shuddering and rustling in a way that felt deliberate. The woman's voice grew louder, and with it, the sense of power in the air intensified. "We felt this power awakening in us. The planet is sending its strength through us. You think you can invade, but you've awakened a sleeping giant. We are the guardians of this world. And now you're going to learn what it truly means to challenge humanity's connection to Earth." Zarnok felt the weight of her words sink into his chest, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, he truly understood the magnitude of his mistake. The power that humanity was tapping into was something the Wylothians couldn't fight. Not with weapons, not with technology, not with anything they had. It was as if the very soul of Earth had bonded with its people and was now calling out for retribution. The wind howled again, this time with a fury that shook the trees and the ground. Zarnok could feel the tremors beneath his feet, as though the planet was rising, responding to the collective will of the humans. He was no longer fighting just a species, he was fighting the very planet itself. And it was a force far beyond his understanding. And in that moment, the reality set in. The Wylothians were not the invaders anymore. They were the ones being hunted. Zarnok stood frozen, staring at the human woman and the growing force around her. The ground beneath him seemed to vibrate with a terrible, unshakable power. His mind raced, scrambling to make sense of what was happening, but it was clear that this was not a simple conquest anymore. Earth, as he had once thought of it, was no longer the weak, defenseless planet they had intended to strip bare. It had become something else, something alive, something far beyond their capacity to conquer. The wind howled again, and the trees around them swayed violently, as though they were being pushed by an invisible force. The leaves rustled, but it wasn't just the sound of wind anymore. It was like the planet itself was whispering, a sound too deep for any human ear to hear, but too clear to ignore. The Wylothians' weapons hummed with energy, but their power felt small, insignificant, compared to the force that was gathering in the very air. Zarnok took a step back, but the earth beneath his feet shifted, a sharp crack echoing as the ground split open, sending a surge of energy into the sky. The Wylothian soldiers stumbled, their balance thrown off by the sudden movement. The clearing was no longer still. It was alive, pulsing, vibrating as if in response to their presence. "Move!" Zarnok shouted, his voice filled with urgency. The realization that they were no longer in control had shaken him to the core. He had led countless invasions, seen planets fall before the might of the Wylothian fleet. But this was something different. They had no weapons that could stand up to what they were facing now. But as the soldiers began to retreat, the earth seemed to respond to their every movement. The ground cracked again, and massive roots erupted from beneath the surface, shooting up like tendrils of a living thing. The Wylothians fired their weapons, but the blasts seemed to be swallowed up by the earth itself, absorbed into the ground without a trace. The woman, still standing at the center of the clearing, raised her arms high, and the wind howled once more, echoing her command. The sky darkened, and the atmosphere thickened with a heavy, unnatural weight. Zarnok could feel the planet's pulse, now unmistakable, a rhythmic thrum beneath his feet, reverberating through his chest. "You thought you could take this world," the woman said, her voice carrying an eerie calm. "But you're not just fighting us anymore. You're fighting Earth itself. And it's awake." A wave of energy surged through the clearing, an invisible force that slammed into the Wylothians with the power of 1,000 storms. Zarnok's soldiers were thrown backward, their armor failing to protect them from the impact. The force was not just physical. It was mental, emotional, a wave of raw power that seeped into their very minds. They could feel the weight of the planet's grief, its anger, and most terrifying of all, its deep, unyielding connection to humanity. Zarnok gritted his teeth, struggling to stay on his feet. He looked around at his fallen soldiers, their bodies twitching as if they were being pulled toward the ground itself. His mind buzzed, and for the first time, he felt fear. True fear. Not of the humans. He had conquered species far stronger than them. But of the planet. The Earth. It was alive, and it was rejecting them. The woman's voice was calm, but there was a note of finality in it now. "You have no place here. This world is not yours to take, and now you will understand what happens when you push too far." The ground cracked open once again, and massive roots surged upward, wrapping around the Wylothian soldiers. They struggled, but the force of the roots was too strong. They tried to fire their weapons, but it was futile. The roots, alive with the energy of the planet, seemed to absorb the blasts, twisting tighter around their limbs, pulling them down to the earth. Zarnak's mind screamed for a way out. He had to think. He had to do something. He couldn't let this be the end. Not like this. Not with the Ilothian Empire at stake. But as he looked around, all he saw was the overwhelming power of Earth and its connection to humanity. He realized, in that moment, that they had made a grave mistake. They hadn't just underestimated the humans, they had underestimated the planet itself. Earth wasn't just a resource to be harvested. It was a force to be reckoned with, and the Ilothians had just become its prey. In a final desperate attempt, Zarnak called for his remaining soldiers to form a retreat, but the earth responded with a violent tremor, sending the remaining Ilothians crashing to the ground. It was too late. The planet had awoken, and nothing they could do would stop the tide of its wrath. And with that realization, Zarnak's fate was sealed. Earth had claimed its defenders, and now, the Ilothians were nothing more than intruders to be erased. The ground beneath Zarnak trembled violently as the roots continued to tighten around his soldiers. He could hear the screams of his comrades as the living tendrils constricted, their cries fading into the hum of the earth. The power of the planet was undeniable, and every pulse from the ground seemed to sap what little hope he had left. His mind was racing, trying to grasp at any semblance of control, any way to escape, but it was clear now that escape wasn't possible. He had underestimated Earth, had seen it only as a resource to be exploited, a weak planet ripe for conquest. But now, Earth was its own force, a living, breathing entity that had awakened with an ancient fury. The woman, the humans around her, and the very ground beneath them were no longer part of a planet that could be invaded. They were part of a sentient defense, a force that would never allow this world to fall. Zarnak struggled, his hands clawing at the roots that held him in place. They were like iron, and he could feel the life of the planet flowing through them, alive with power he could never understand. He fought against them, but it was futile. The more he struggled, the tighter the roots became, until they had him completely immobilized, his body pressed against the earth with a force that could have crushed him. Above him, the sky continued to darken, the wind howling in a vicious chorus with the growing energy from the ground. Zarnak's vision blurred as a deep primal roar seemed to rise from the very heart of the planet itself. It was as if Earth was voicing its anger, its sorrow, and its defiance all at once. And for the first time in his life, Zarnak understood what it meant to be small, to be insignificant in the face of something so vast, so ancient. The human woman stepped forward, her eyes glowing faintly with that same strange intensity. She looked down at him with a mixture of sadness and resolution. "You could have left," she said, her voice gentle, yet carrying the weight of centuries. "You could have walked away. But now you're a part of Earth's history, just like the rest of those who've come before you. The planet will remember this moment, your mistake, your invasion. It's not just about us. It's about Earth and everything that calls it home." Zarnak's breath came in shallow gasps as he realized what she was saying. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to preserve the balance of the planet itself. The connection between Earth and humanity wasn't some simple bond. It was a symbiotic relationship, one that had existed since the dawn of time. Earth had been watching, waiting for a moment like this to defend itself. And now, humanity had tapped into that defense, awakening it fully. He looked around at his soldiers, all trapped in the same fate. The Ilothians, masters of war and conquest, were powerless against the living force of Earth. There was no technology, no strategy, no weapon that could save them now. Earth had decided they would not leave. The woman nodded to him, almost as if she could hear his thoughts. "You'll never take Earth. Not with weapons, not with force. The humans you sought to destroy. They are its voice, its defenders, and now you've given them power beyond your comprehension." Zarnak's eyes filled with despair as he understood the full extent of their failure. They had made a mistake, an irreversible mistake, And now there was no way out. Earth had already won. With one final surge of power, the roots pulled him and his soldiers into the earth itself, as if the planet was swallowing them whole. It was swift, final, and without mercy. The sky above them blazed with unnatural light, the atmosphere humming with an energy that would last for centuries. The planet, once thought to be vulnerable and weak, had reclaimed its strength, and the Vilothians, who had come to take, were now nothing more than a memory, lost to time. And as the earth closed around them, the woman turned to the others, her expression solemn but resolute. "Let this be a reminder," she said, her voice carried by the wind. "The earth will always fight back, and humanity will always stand with it. No force, no invader, will ever take what belongs to this world." The sky began to clear, the dark storm of energy dissipating into a calm, unbroken sky. The forest around them seemed to breathe once more, its stillness a sign of victory. The humans, those awakened by Earth's power, stood tall, no longer mere survivors but its protectors, its guardians. The balance had been restored, and as they walked away from the clearing, they knew that Earth was more than just a planet. It was a force, alive and enduring. And humanity, bound to it in ways unseen, had become a part of that eternal strength. The Vilothians had learned, too late, the true cost of underestimating humanity, and the price of provoking a living world.